So soil chemistry is about the balances of the elements in the soil. It includes pH, nutrients, and also toxic chemicals. So knowing what your soil's chemical balance is helps you understand what nutrients to apply when, and also what to do about any problems that come up. Your major nutrients, now these are the ones that plants need in large quantities: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, that's the K, sulphur and calcium. Then there's trace elements. These are also necessary for plants, but only in very minute quantities, and too much of them can become toxic. As another point, nutrients can be contained in the soil but unavailable to plants. So if you did a soil test, it might show that you had enough phosphorus, but your plant could be phosphorus deficient if it can't take it up. And there are some reasons for that. If the soil is waterlogged or too dry, the roots won't be able to get the stuff into the actual plant. There can be toxicities that stop the plants getting things, and strong acidity or alkalinity, that's extremes of pH, can affect the plant's ability to take up nutrients. And there are different plant species that have different requirements. Legumes need enough phosphorus in the soil so that they can get their rhizobia working properly to fix nitrogen. Blueberries love iron, which is why they like acid soils, because acid releases iron, and so on. So, with soil nutrients and testing, if you want to test your soil, you want to get a representative sample, something that's typical of the area. So you want to avoid areas like the spot where you've been feeding out to cattle, because that will have a lot of nutrients from hay or pellets or whatever. And you want to avoid tracks, because that soil will be compacted, pressed, it's probably had manure on it and that sort of thing. Areas underneath trees, if you've only got a few trees in the paddock, the area underneath the tree will be different to the general area, because the trees have been taking up nutrients deeper in the soil and dropping them on the surface. Also, if you have stock, they camp under trees and you get a lot of manure there. If you're testing pH, it can be useful to test the 0 to 10 and the 10 to 20. Typically, most soil tests are done on a 10 centimetre deep sample. So this holds true for horticulture, vines, garden soils, pastures, crops, whatever. In Australia, the standard is 10 centimetres deep. If you read literature from other countries, be aware that they may have different soil testing depths. In the US, the standard is 15 centimetres or 6 inches. In New Zealand, it's apparently 7.5 centimetres. So they'll have different recommendations because they have different depths of soil. You can convert them, you just need to be aware. And observing the plants, and you can get plant tissue tested, send off some leaves, get that tested, can be useful to check if the nutrients in the soil are actually being accessed by the plants. So if you're choosing a soil test, you go on the website and it says you can have option A, B, C or D, and you think, well, which one do I need? Ask yourself, what do you want to find out? Why are you doing the test? How's that test going to help you make management decisions? If you're doing it for your garden, you probably want a balanced soil that's got all the nutrients that you need for vegetables. If you're doing it for cropping or pasture on a large scale, you might be wanting to know what's limiting my growth and how can I improve that without spending a heap of money on anything that's not necessary. So in that case, you can look at what's in each test and say, right, I might just need the basic one, or if I think there's a trace element deficiency, then I'm definitely going to want to get the test that includes trace elements in that. Or if you're looking for something specific, you might just say, look, I just need to know about salinity. I need to get salt tested. I don't need nitrogen and phosphorus. I'm just going to get that test. So your sources of nutrients, they can come from a wide variety. If you've got a soil that's got high inherent fertility, like, it's a good, well-structured clay soil, it's deep, comes from, an area that with, good growth sort of thing, and you've got a low removal enterprise, you're just running a few alpacas or sheep or whatever, you might be able to just keep on running those animals there for a very long time without adding fertiliser because you've got a good nutrient bank in the soil. On the other hand, if you've got a low fertility soil and you're running a very high output enterprise, like you're harvesting crops off it or you're running a market garden, you're probably going to need to replace that nutrients that you're taking out very quickly. So your sources of nutrients are going to include synthetic fertilisers, rock minerals, plant or animal waste, so this is your composts and your manures, and possibly if you have a specific need for a specific element, then you can get something that will treat just that. Nitrogen is unique in the nutrients in that it can be supplied from the air to the soil, usually via various forms of biology, so bacteria, legumes with their symbiotic bacteria, etc. So your management can influence how much nitrogen you're getting from the atmosphere. If you plant a lot of legumes, you're likely to get a good nitrogen supply from that, whereas if you're running just grass, then you're going to be relying on either free living nitrogen or nitrogen out of a bag. Your budget is generally going to determine the best source for you and your circumstances. Just to note that carbon is not generally thought of as a nutrient, but it is a major source of food for soil biology, which helps to keep the soil healthy and the other nutrients cycling. So don't discount carbon when you're thinking about what to put on your soil. Using fertiliser efficiently is a good way to keep your soil healthy, keep your bank account healthy, and make sure that your plants have what they need when they need it. So fertiliser use is most efficient when it's matched to the crop demand. If you go and put out compost or manure in the middle of summer and nothing's growing, you're going to lose a lot of the nutrients as it dries up and just gets broken down. Whereas if you put it on when your crop is growing, it can move into the soil and get used straight away. Slow release forms of fertiliser, staggered or strategic applications, or organic-based fertilisers, which get released to plants as they get broken down, can be one way of applying nutrients to the plant when it needs it. A healthy soil takes in that nutrition and supplies it to the plants more effectively than an unhealthy soil. Because you get deep root growth, plants can take up nutrients and water from deeper in the soil. And in terms of efficiency of nutrients, you want to make sure that the use of your major nutrients, like your nitrogen and so forth, isn't being stopped by a deficiency of one of the minor nutrients. So you might put on a lot of nitrogen because you think, look, my plant looks nitrogen deficient, it's pale, it needs to green up, I'll put some nitrogen on. If the problem is actually a sulphur deficiency, the plant is nitrogen deficient, all right, because it can't use the nitrogen until it gets sulphur. And there are other things in there. Plants can't use phosphorus unless they've got the right amount of zinc. And there's a lot of interactions there. Anybody got any questions on general soil nutrition? No? Okay, we'll move on to soil acidity, because soil acidity is a big issue in much of the Fleurieu and Adelaide Hills area. So what is it? What causes it? How to treat it? Are there any alternatives to the most common treatment, which is lime? So soil pH. pH stands for potential hydrogen. So pH measures how much hydrogen there is in the soil. It's a reverse logarithmic scale. So the lower the number, the higher the amount of hydrogen and the more acid the thing is. It's really weird, but hey, I didn't make it up, and the guy who didn't make it up is dead, so I can't do anything about it. 7 is neutral. In the middle, you've got an equal balance, and as the number gets higher, the 8, 9, 10, it becomes more alkaline, which is less acid. So to give you an idea of sort of where things sit around there, milk is around 7, 7.5. Coke is around 4, so is orange juice, by the way. Soaps and detergents and so forth tend to be around 8, 8.5. On your skin, it's generally slightly acidic, so around 6.5. So because it's a logarithmic scale, every time you move a point, it goes up by 10. So 6 is 10 times more acidic than 7, and 5 is 10 times more acidic than 6, which means it's 100 times more acidic than 7. pH is measured in either water or calcium chloride. Calcium chloride measures all of the hydrogen that's present, but calcium chloride is not something that you buy off the shelf, so that one is done in a lab. Whereas the test kits that you can buy in a hardware or a garden store are the water measurement. The lab often does both, so it'll give you a pHW or pHCACL. The kits that you buy are not suited to very high organic matter substances like compost or potting mix. They were designed to work in soil, and they do that very well. But if you measure your potting mix, it won't be accurate. Another note, if you're reading literature from overseas, sometimes they will talk about pH and they won't tell you which one they're using, because pH calcium chloride measures all the acidity. It generally shows slightly more acid than pH water. So if something says that this plant likes a pH range between 5.5 and 6, you say, well, is that pH 5.5 water, or is it pH 5.5 calcium chloride? Because there's a difference. So if you're setting up your garden or whatever and it says this vegetable needs a pH of this, make sure you know which pH it's talking about. And here we have a diagram showing nutrient availability, which changes with the pH. So, for example, and this is actually pH water, but it's fairly close. So nitrogen is mostly available between about 6 to 8. Potassium, 6 to 8. Aluminium is toxic. It's not available at all in the neutral zone, but it does become available when you get a strongly acid soil, and it's released, and because it's toxic to plants, your growth goes down the more acid your soil. Same thing with iron. Phosphorus and phosphates, mostly available in the neutral zone, but they start to react with calcium once you get more alkaline. So this is where you put on phosphorus and it gets locked up in very alkaline soils. Then you've got the rest of your elements, and you can see that the most balanced combination, where the good stuff is highly available and the toxic stuff is not available, the best spot is basically between about 6 to 8 pH water or 5.5 to 8 pH calcium chloride. So generally speaking, neutral is, or close to neutral, is good for pH. And it even affects the biology in the soil. Fungi, not so sensitive, but the bacteria, which are your nutrient processors and take things and pull it apart and make it available to plants, in the acid soils, they start to die off. So what causes acidity? Farming practices or gardening practices include inefficient use of nitrogen, or nitrogen-fixing plants. So this is where the soil's been overloaded with nitrogen. It can't handle it all. Some of it leaches through. The nitrogen is gone, but the hydrogen remains. The other thing that happens is where produce is removed from the garden or farm, usually that produce is mildly alkaline. If you think about milk, it's got a lot of nutrients in it and it's mildly alkaline. All those nutrients and alkalinity have come from the pasture or the hay that the cows are being fed. So if you take the milk away, you're taking alkalinity away and hydrogen is what gets left. So reversing it means neutralising the acidity, so putting alkalinity back in the soil. That can be done by applying lime, which is alkaline crushed rock. Some fertilisers will neutralise acidity, and there are other alkaline amendments, such as alkaline clay, alkaline irrigation water in some cases. Biochar can be alkaline if it's made in certain ways. So it's basically, you've got too much baking soda in your cake. You need to neutralise it by adding some acid, probably in the form of lemon juice. And if your cake explodes at this point, it's not my fault. I didn't tell you that. I have seen some soils that had so much sodium bicarbonate in them that I swear I could have ground them up and put them in a cake and had it rise. So, managing your soil health with acidity. Any practice that improves soil health is likely to slow down the rate of acidification in the soil. So acidification overall is a natural process. It's just when humans are taking produce off and not putting stuff back, it gets accelerated. So slowing or reversing acidification, liming to replace nutrients and alkalinity, efficient use of nitrogen, either as fertiliser or composts or manures. So this is not using too much and putting it on when the plants can use it straight away so that it doesn't get wasted. And increasing soil carbon levels, because soil organic matter helps to buffer the soil. It'll absorb a bit of hydrogen. It will help to sort of soak it up and not release it into the soil as quickly. When you're adding lime, there's a general sort of rule of thumb. On sandy soils, it's about 1 tonne per acre, which is 2 to 2.5 tonnes per hectare. I don't know whether you guys tend to think metric or think imperial, but whatever it is, your contractors will work it out. If you're thinking about this for the home garden, 2 tonnes per hectare is about 200 grams per square metre. So figure that out, and it's about a handful of powdered lime per square metre. Just under a cup if you're not using a cup measurement. In loams, you can use a little bit more, and in clays you use about twice as much as you do for sands. Sandy soils, it's easier to change the pH, but it re-acidifies quickly. Clay soils take a while to acidify, but once they have, it takes more lime to move them back. And the effectiveness of the lime or liming material is the chemical properties. That's how much actual carbonate is in that powder, and the surface area and the fineness. So how fine that rock has been ground. It is a legal requirement that lime sellers must provide you with an analysis of their lime if they are asked. So if you can't see the analysis, ask them for it, they have to provide it. That analysis will show you how good the lime is at neutralising it and also the effective neutralising value. So it's sort of chemical and the fineness. If you've got a deep acid soil, to get the change in pH down deeper, you're either going to have to mix it deeper or you're going to have to keep the surface at a fairly neutral level and wait for that lime material to work its way down. So for a farmer or whatever, really good time to apply lime is when you're reseeding your pasture, because you get a bit of soil disturbance, helps to get the lime deeper into the soil profile. With gardening, you can sprinkle it on the soil surface and turn it over and mix it through. With cropping, there have been some people that have tried basically slotting lime, that is dropping it down with the seed or under the seed. Mixed results, because lime powder doesn't flow very easily. Are there alternatives to lime? Well, yes, there is. Alkaline clay will work quite well. So if you have an acid topsoil over an alkaline subsoil, you can actually mix the two a little bit and neutralise the top. Just don't overdo it. People can get alkaline clay if they've got alkaline clay in that corner of the paddock and acid sand in that corner of the paddock. You can get some clay from the alkaline area and shift it over to the acid area and neutralise the acidity. And there was a really dramatic example of this out near Waipinga, where a guy had cleaned out his dam and spread the alkaline clay. And that particular paddock was like green and growing, and the rest of his paddocks weren't. If you have alkaline irrigation water, that can provide a source of carbonates and neutralise acidity. And that happens down in the southeast, where the soil is naturally an acid sand, but where they've irrigated it with the groundwater, which has a lot of carbonates in it, it's neutralised the acidity. There are some industrial byproducts. I don't think we have any in Adelaide anymore, but we used to have a factory that produced carbonate byproducts. It was sold as Nutrilime, and it was pretty good, pretty effective. Some areas have lime-treated biosolids. So this is treated sewage waste, which has had lime mixed through it, basically to neutralise it, and it can be used as fertiliser that neutralises acidity. Biochars and organic matter. Economics of each one depends on how close they are, how cheap they are, and how effective they are at reducing acidity. Some people ask, can I improve the soil health without treating the acidity, particularly in areas where lime's expensive? Liming or the equivalent is very, very effective. Improving soil health without it is going to be difficult. In the short term, you can add organic matter to the soil. That increases the buffering capacity and absorbs a bit of the hydrogen and aluminium, which are toxic to plants. You can use acid-tolerant plant species, and they will maintain ground cover and keep living roots in the soil. However, they're not treating the acidity, and if it keeps on becoming acidic, then those plants will eventually die as well. And you can provide nutrients that are lacking in acid soils to the plants by doing things like foliar fertiliser or that sort of thing. And that will keep the plants alive for longer, but as I said, it's not treating the cause in the soil, so the toxic effects of the soil acidity will still be there. So, take-home message on soil acidity. Soil pH is an important part of that soil health picture. An acid soil, that's a soil that has a pH of less than 5 in calcium chloride, is going to have reduced biological function and therefore problems for plant growth. Improving the health of that soil is usually most easily achieved by liming to raise the soil pH above 5.5. So if your pH is less than 5, you need to do something about it. If it's above 5.5, it's okay. If it's in between, keep an eye on it. Just watch it. Organic matter's got some use in buffering the soil pH, absorbing toxic aluminium, and providing food to maintain the soil biology, but it's not as effective in a soil that's already highly acidic. And overall, managing for good soil health is also likely to be good management for keeping your soil pH in a good range. So has anybody got any questions about that, whether it's about pH or nutrients or about, basic things like soil colour or structure or texture or how much water or why is my soil water repellent?
So I just have a quick question. So I guess on where I work, we've been trying to figure out how to plant, and it's a new property, and so it seems like it's water repellent sand. But someone had told us gypsum, but is that only really just going to work on clay then? Or could that potentially work on sand as well?
If you put on a really powdery gypsum, it may be fine enough that the water will try and stick to it and go in the soil. Okay. But overall, I would not add gypsum to overcome water repellents. Okay. If it's a small area or a high-value crop, then using the wetters will allow you to get the plants established. Okay. If it's a long-term sort of thing, then I would probably get professional advice on whether it's worthwhile changing the soil or whether you can get more tolerant plants there. And I do have an example of water repellent sand in a bag on the desk, so everybody can have a look at it.
What's the scale?
So we just bought a winery. It's maybe 8 acres or so, and we're just trying to figure out what we can. We have the winery itself, but we're just trying to figure out what we can plant where. And we're trying to. We've been bogging compost all over the sand because it's immediately sinking through. But we're just trying to figure. We want to put in some fruit trees, and potentially some vines. But we're just trying to figure out, where to have everything. But it seems like the entire property is just this repellent sand, and so we're just like, what do we? Start?
Yeah. I guess it really depends whether you want to permanently change the soil, which can be expensive but lasts a long time, or whether you just want to overcome the water repellents long enough to get the plants established. And then you may be able to use the water repellents to your advantage by channeling the water towards your plants.
If you do have a question, could you speak up quite loudly because it's not picking up really well on the video.
I'll repeat questions as well, so hopefully it will hear me.
Yes, if you've got alkaline and you want it to become more neutral, what's the best way?
Okay, so the question is, if you've got alkaline soil and you want the soil to become more neutral, what can you do about it? I would recommend having enough organic matter in the soil to buffer the alkalinity. There are ways to basically put acid into the soil to neutralise the alkaline, but the problem is it is very easy to go too far and cause a lot of damage. So if you're only doing it on a small area, adding elemental sulphur, the elemental sulphur will be converted in the soil to sulphuric acid. That will neutralise the alkalinity. If it goes too far, you'll end up with an acid soil and you'll have to put lime back on. If you add organic matter itself is usually in the neutral range, so it will have a bit of a neutralisation value, and it will also buffer the alkalinity to help nutrients become more available. So, yeah. And it also depends a bit on how alkaline we're talking. Are we talking sort of 8.5 and you want to get it back to 7.5, which is a lot easier than getting something that's an alkaline level of 10 and trying to move that.
How much can it drop using organic matter?
So how much can we move the pH using organic matter on the alkaline soil? It depends how much you put on. If you were in a garden situation and you went 50-50 with compost, you will probably get it back to 7.5 from, say, 8.5. But if you were looking at something, where you're just putting on a little bit, then it would probably maintain the pH still quite alkaline, but you would find better growth with more organic matter. There are fertilisers that are acidifying. So you can, for instance, if you use sulphate of ammonia, that's a very acidifying fertiliser, and people that have used it on sandy soils have changed their pH from 8 to 5 in a matter of 5 to 10 years. And this is in cropping situations. But as I said, you need to be very careful, otherwise you'll find yourself you've ended up with an acid soil and now you've got a whole different bunch of problems. Nothing else? Well, we now have a bit of a practical session where those who want to can get their hands dirty. I've got some pH test kits and we've got some water bottles so that we can practice looking at different soils and their textures. So at this point, I will just grab a sample and do a bit of a demonstration in front of the camera. And everybody else, if you've brought your own soil sample, you can test that. Otherwise, I've got some 3 different soils on the tables, so you can try out a couple of those and get a feel for some different soil types. All right, how's this? Be reasonable? Okay, so I've got a handful of soil here, and I look at it and I can see that it's fairly crumbly with little round sort of granules. So the structure is crumbly, which is a good start. I've got my water bottle here and I put on just enough to moisten the soil. If you put on too much, just add some soil, as it were. If you don't have enough water, you can always add a bit more. If you don't have a squeezy bottle, you can just tip it on, but having a drink bottle or something that you can drip it in is generally useful. So you squeeze it together until the soil's absorbed the water. In some soils, you can actually smell the, that good soil, just wet soil kind of smell, which is generally an indicator that it's got a bit of organic matter in it, which, soil biology and so forth. So I've got my little sample here. It's come together. When I rub my fingers together, it feels quite smooth. I'm not feeling any sand grains in that. So I know now that it's not a sand. If it refuses to form a ball, it's a sand. It just falls apart. So I can rub that in my hands. And then I do the ribbon test, which is you squeeze it between your thumb and your forefinger and see how long a ribbon you can get out of your sample. You have to make sure that everything's there's a root holding it together. See, this is why roots are good for the soil. It stops it falling apart. Yeah. So in this case, I'm getting a piece of soil, and it breaks at around 2 to 2.5 centimetres. And because it feels a bit slippery, not much clay, not much sand, I would say this is a clay loam. It's absorbed water well, it's got good water holding capacity, and it would be a really nice soil for pretty much anything. Good nutrient holding capacity, absorbs water well. If I had this in my garden, I'd be really, really happy. So that's the texture test. Now I'll just grab another sample. So this stuff. So this is the pH test kit, the ones that you can get from your hardware or garden store. Something to be aware of with these is the different chains sell different brands, and the different brands have slightly different colours. So this is the colour chart that goes with this particular brand. If I had a different brand, I don't want to use this colour chart with the different brand because they won't match properly. If you use, as long as you keep the right colour chart with the right brand, they should all work. However, if it comes up with a really strange result, don't be shy, take it back, because sometimes these things get, stored in the wrong way or whatever, or something's gone wrong. So, if it feels wrong to you, trust your gut and at least get another kit to check it against. If you get a weird result with two different kits, then maybe it is the soil. So what I've done here, and I'll just redo it on the soil a bit further over. This one, the purple one or dark coloured one, this is the actual indicator dye. And I just put a few drops. Drop. You don't need very much. You don't need to make soup with it. And you drop that on the soil. Now this here, the white powder, is so that you can see the colour clearly. On a white soil you wouldn't need it, but this is dark brown and you can't really see the colour. So you just puff on a little bit of white powder. Then you give it 10 seconds or so to develop the colour, and you compare the colour with what's on the chart. And if I have a look here, the colour I'm seeing is about 6.5. So 6.5 water, right in that neutral to slightly acid zone, perfect for good nutrient availability. So this is a really nice clay loam soil, neutral to slightly acid. Whoever's got this soil is lucky. Okay, so grab a soil sample, have a look, and we'll see what the other soils are and compare them. Oh, well. This is pretty good. That one off there. Yeah. Oh, you lost the
Well, it's not good, it's got this water off.
no, scrape it off onto the tray. Yeah. I'll just do a demonstration here for the camera of water repellents. So I've got my soil sample here, and you can see that the water on the sand, instead of soaking in, it's beaded up, and the sand is actually gone over the top of the droplet. And if I shake it a little bit, we can see the water's just not soaking in at all. And if it was sloping, it would run off and land on the floor, so I won't tip it. Yeah, one of the interesting things about water repellent sand. Marvelous. This is your home soil. That's okay. Like, this is this is a learning thing. We can go back to you. So we have a question that's come through.
I've dug up some of my lawn and started growing veggies. We have runoff from a hill behind us and water before. I have noticed the plants are not thriving and the leaves are quite yellow. The soil tends to waterlog in winter but looks quite dark and healthy. What's the best way to approach fixing this problem?
Okay, so the question is about a soil that's waterlogged in winter and the veggies are not doing so well, looking a bit yellow. Improving the drainage is probably going to be the first step. So I would probably go into the garden fork and do a bit of deep digging and see what is the soil like underneath. You know, is there clay there or rocks that's holding the water, or is the water logging being caused just by the sheer volume there? So have a look underneath first to see if you can improve the drainage. If it's a heavy clay soil, then gypsum or organic matter can probably help. If it's a sandy soil that's getting waterlogged, then improving the drainage is most likely, because a sandy soil left to itself will drain quite well. The yellowness sounds like it's nitrogen deficiency, but whether the deficiency is being caused by lack of nitrogen or whether it's because the soil's waterlogged and it can't get to the nitrogen that's there is going to be the question. Because if it's the waterlogging, then putting on more nitrogen isn't going to help. In fact, it's bad for the soil. So I would say fix the waterlogging first, see if that improves it, and then, if needed, add a source of nitrogen, whether that's compost or manure or just plain fertiliser. You may not show the correct result because potting mix is so high in organic matter that these, they weren't really designed for such a high organic matter mix.
And I didn't take the time to go to look up how to centimetre depth and
That's all right. It's a start. Now you know how to do it. You can grab your own pH test kit. They cost between $20 and $30 at the moment. And theoretically, you can get 100 tests out of one of these kits if you're careful with the amount of liquid that you use. That one looks pretty neutral, really. 7.5 maybe?
a couple of metres and one of those.
Yeah. So, up from there. So that's the first sort of that one. That's coming up a much brighter green. So that red soil, probably 5.5, I reckon. Between 6 and 5.5. But yeah, it's a bit difference there. Okay.
Is there a reason why they don't put pH on the potting soil so you know what it is?
The question is there a reason they don't put pH on potting soil, like when you buy it, so that you know what it is? The good producers will put an analysis on the bag that says this mix contains these ingredients and has a pH of whatever. You'll particularly see it if you buy potting mix for acid-loving plants. And they will say the pH is between 5.5 and 6. It's an acid one for acid-loving plants. And I guess they kind of assume that all the other potting mixes, if they say that it's, you know, for average use, then it's approximately neutral. But again, you should, if you really want to find out, you can contact the company and they should be able to send you a complete analysis. A similar thing with garden soils, by the way. You know, if you order a garden loam or whatever, they should be able to tell you what's in it and what characteristics it has. Yeah. So yeah, just talking about garden soils, if you order, say, some garden loam for your garden, then whoever sells it to you should be able to give you a composition of that soil so that you know exactly what you're getting. There were some cases in the past where people were selling soils that had been taken out of developments alongside the Murray River, and they came out of sulfuric acid areas, and it caused a lot of problems with the gardens because acid sulfate takes about 2 to 3 months of drying out to develop. So these poor people got their gardens and it looked really nice, and 2 or 3 months later they had a pH of 3.
That's what I mean, because generally the acid soil ones cost a lot more.
Yes. You could produce your own acidic compost for your whatever plants, your blueberries or whatever it is, by adding a little bit of sulfur or iron sulfate or aluminium sulfate. You know, you can buy these hydrangea bluing chemicals. They all acidify the soil and they're all quite easy to overdo it with. So be conservative if you decide to go down that route. But yeah, the other thing is to do is basically water it with a weak vinegar solution for a couple of months and see how it goes. But yeah, to test it is difficult with these kits because they're not designed for compost. Other pH kits that you can get in hardware stores, you can get pH kits for hydroponics. They're not designed for soil, they're designed for liquids. So they don't work on soil, just like these ones won't work properly on a hydroponic solution. They're not designed for it. The pH sticks that you stick into the ground and the needle moves, I don't recommend them because I don't think they work very well at all. And they certainly won't work in dry soil. It has to be moist. So
Kate's just saying that the same question, that the soil is waterlogged due to being dense soil, not quite clay but very compact. How to fix the waterlogging?
Okay, so a question about a soil that is compacted and dense and having waterlogging problems because of that. Opening up the soil. Now, has she said whether it's a pasture situation or
She's just dug up the lawn.
Just dug up the lawn
And made a veggie patch.
Yeah, yeah. In that case, I would say adding organic matter in there, compost of some sort. You can dig in things like pea straw or lucerne. What you want is to get enough organic matter in there that it's helping to physically hold it apart. If it is clayey enough that it feels heavy in the hand, then some gypsum may help, and it's 500 grams per square metre application rate. So if it's clayey enough, then gypsum might be able to help there. If it's more sandy, then gypsum won't make a difference. And the depth to which you work the soil will help too. The deeper you get it, the more the more water can drain through and the more air can move through. Having a bottom, as it were, to your garden bed can be useful in summer because it means that your water's not all draining away, it's staying there. You just need to regulate the amount that you put on. If you don't have a way of doing that because it's getting waterlogged from rainfall, then, yeah, improving drainage and the water holding capacity of the soil is the best bet.
Thank you.
Can I ask a bit about soil biology?
Yep.
And obviously, there's great benefits, but some people are saying that it is the overall goal anyway. That just like when I scratch back the surface of my garden, it's in line, but it's like doing flicking and kicking. And, is that along going towards a good direction, or is that?
Yep. So for those following at home, the question's about soil biology. How much is enough? Can you have too much? Is all soil biology good? We are actually going to have the next section is about soil biology and soil carbon. I will say that generally speaking, more is better with soil biology as long as it's beneficial. As long as soil biology is active, it's difficult to overload with soil biology. The more you've got, the more you'll sort of turn over. The only thing with soil biology and adding it to soil is that you're basically, if you think of them as livestock, you need to provide for them like you would your livestock or your pet, in that they need shelter, water, air and food. So if your soil physical structure or your chemistry is wrong for the biology, then they'll die. So improving the structure and the chemistry of your soil can almost automatically improve your soil biology because now they've got a home and food and water and air, so they'll thrive and they'll breed and you'll get more. So if we move on to the next section then, if there's no more questions, and we'll talk a bit more about biology and carbon in the soil.